Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Saturday, October 12th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Oregon game is today, the game against Michigan in 49 days. We have been churning out bonus content all week long because this is a big game week. I probably don't need to tell you that, but we've got more bonus coverage today. This is the third Ross Fulton show of the week. Normally we give you one on offense, one on defense, but with it being number 2 versus number 3, I want to take a look at some of the stuff that Oregon does, give you a little bit of a schematic breakdown of the Ducks and what you might be able to expect later tonight. And when we have Ross on the show, we're sponsored by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse, the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus, named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. So, all right, let's, Ross, start with the Oregon offense. I see the numbers every week. Everyone always wants to talk offense. Offense is much more fun than defense. I get it. So let's start with the Oregon offense. It feels like Will Stein, the offensive coordinator for Oregon, he does a lot of the same stuff that Ohio State does, just kind of more so.
Yeah, I saw a stat. I think it was from Parker Fleming, one of the advanced stat guys. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize. It was like, Ohio State, I think it run on 28% of their plays were like an RPO, a relief concept. And I think Oregon's in the 40s. So it's taking Ohio State's offense and just doubling that. Whereas I think Ohio State uses those RPOs to create space for the run game and the downfield passing game. We'll talk about that. Oregon, it's the feature, right? It's really what they want to lean into. And so Will Stein, as you mentioned, similar to Chip Kelly, similar to Ryan Day, he'll use a lot of trip sets, a lot of tight bunch, a lot of motion to diagnose coverages. This first play that I diagrammed, straightforward, right? I just want to set the tone. You're going to see a lot of this, right? Getting trips. It's just your typical inside zone with a bubble screen. They will happily take the extra yards, happy to get the ball to their wide receivers quickly on the perimeter and try to get yards after catch. Again, it's as I said, I think it just take what you think about all the RPOs and reliefs that we've talked about from Ohio State and double that, right? It's just it's not just one component of the offense. It's the main course.
All right. So that's kind of the broad strokes of what to expect. Oregon, I think a lot of how this game is going to go is going to be dependent on who can run the ball, which team can run the ball better. And Oregon has a pretty good running back, Jordan James. He kind of tore up the Michigan State defense a little bit last week. What kind of a threat can he pose against the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I'm pretty impressed with him. I will say, Oregon's interior offensive line there's been some question marks. They reshuffled after the first couple games. I can't say that I'm still really impressed with their interior offensive line. I think they're playing at a better level. I'm just not sure they have the athleticism that you would expect, compared to Ohio State's offensive line. And so, but I do think that what Oregon, they're not just, yes, they want to get the ball out on the perimeter quickly, and that's a big component of what they do. But they do in part want to do it to open up run lanes inside. And Jordan James, as I said, I think he's an impressive running back. And so this second concept is, again, you're now they run this this is a GT counter, and it's not just inside, they have a very varied run game, right? That also is in common with Chip Kelly. You'll see inside zone, you'll see a lot of stretch from the pistol. They use that pretty effectively against Michigan State. You'll see, but you'll also see a lot of gap schemes, a lot of counter, a lot of they run dart where you pull the tackle and run power. They run power, so you get a lot of, especially on the inside, a lot of gap runs. And so, here they just run a little arrow again, like Dylan Gabriel's reading the backside. He gives on the backside, defensive end and linebacker stay home on this one. So he gives, and again, they're happy to run the football. I think what's interesting to me is we've seen Ohio State, and we've talked about this a little bit. We've seen Ohio State defend RPO heavy teams in two pretty distinct ways this year. There's the Marshall example that we talked about where they played a lot of cover 4, right? So if Marshall was in 2x2 open, so you had 4 wide receivers, 2 on each side. They would basically get 3 over 2, as we talked about, walk the linebackers out. You take away the RPOs with numbers, right? Like this UCLA example, they're not going to pull and throw the relief because they don't have the numbers. Then you're playing down a person in the box, right? And so that gets into back to my conversation, when Ohio State played Marshall, they did not obviously have Tyleik Williams. He is a difference maker inside. So do they feel like they can play down a man in the box or put your linebackers in conflict and count on the defensive interior to win? I think the other option is like that clip we showed earlier this week against Iowa, where you play cover one. That takes away the conflict on the RPOs or reliefs. You've covered everyone up. Then you can let your safeties, play downhill, where Caleb Downs and Latham Ranson are so good. I think you'll probably see a combination of both, because the problem is, as we'll get to here in a little bit, like if you play cover one all the time, Will Stein's happy to run like mesh and pick plays and other things. And you don't want to be like Alabama last week against Vanderbilt. I posted something on Buckeye Huddle where like anything else on defense these days, if you're super predictable, offenses will take advantage of it. So I think you're going to see a mix and match of those. But I do think you'll see probably more aggressiveness than they showed against a Marshall, but it's going to have to be somewhere in between. And as I said, like Jim Knowles' change up to teams running man beaters is to try to trick them and run zone when they think there's man. So I think you'll see that cat and mouse game going on.
The Oregon offense is interesting because they've got a quarterback in Dylan Gabriel who's very good at certain stuff, but it's only certain stuff. And they do the things they're good at to a degree that seems like it's pretty unique, where he throws a lot to one side of the field and he throws a lot kind of close to the line of scrimmage, not a lot of stuff further down the field. That feels like that's helpful because one of their goals is to get the ball out in 2.5 seconds. And if you're not running long routes, sure, that's great to get the ball out in 2.5 seconds. But it also feels like it's kind of limiting. So can you kind of walk us through what to expect from the Oregon passing offense on Saturday night?
Yeah, I think that, as I said, unlike Ohio State, like there's been some consternation, as we've discussed, among Ohio State fans about Will Howard's ability to throw the football downfield. But I don't think there's a lot of question of like that mid-range intermediate passing game, right? Like we see that every week. Will Howard's very accurate there. With Oregon, that's sort of been missing. They run a lot of, as I said, a lot of perimeter stuff, a lot of quick game, and they'll take shots if you give them the one-on-one. I don't know how effective it is, but they will take shots. They've hit a couple, but they really don't have like that mid-range game, right? So like this play, for instance, this is a little snag concept, which is also a Chip Kelly, Ryan Day favorite, where you run, the one receiver sort of runs a little curl, the inside receiver runs a corner route, and then you run a running back to the flat, and you get kind of a triangle read. This is all even dressed up even more, where they have the tight end, again, like, they send a guy in motion to try to get, pre-snap read for the quarterback. Again, like a Chip Kelly staple, Will Stein will use a lot of motion. But then they use the tight end as a lead blocker here. And so it adds like a running back swing screen element to the snag concept. So again, like a lot of quick game, a lot of underneath stuff. I do think Ferguson, the tight end, they've hit some big plays off of using him off the run action. So that's another threat to worry about. But I will say worry about, with all these underneath games, picking on the Ohio State linebackers in coverage, particularly Sonny Styles. Like we've talked about that against Michigan State. They eliminated some of that conflict last week by using him on pressure schemes more. So I guess that's another benefit of playing cover one, is you can, blitz Styles or green dog him to sort of take him out of that zone. But it's not all Styles' fault. Like he's basically spent the last 2 weeks playing overwhelmingly as a 4-3 Sam linebacker. And so presumably Oregon is not a heavy 2 tight end, 12 personnel team. I wouldn't be surprised if they use a little bit of it to see how Ohio State responds. And do they bring in 3 linebackers, or, Jim Knowles back when he's in the Big 12 used to call it like fake 12, and he wouldn't take his nickel off the field. But so do they keep Jordan Hancock out there? But this is going to be a heavy Jordan Hancock game. So all that's to say this, presumably that means that you're moving Cody Simon back to Mike and Sonny Styles back to Will. And he hasn't played there basically for 2 weeks. I mean, limited snaps. So again, you sort of have those underneath zones. We've talked about the issues matching. So I think at a minimum, when Oregon hits these underneath routes, you have to tackle well, right? Like that is one of the benefits Ohio State has, is with Caleb Downs and Latham Ranson. They have limited things from becoming big explosives, right? But I do think that if I'm Oregon, my game plan probably starts with trying to target the linebackers, try to get them in conflict, being aggressive off of, heavy play action, getting the ball out in these like sort of underneath middle zones, and see how well they handle coverage.
Well, that's seeing how well the Buckeyes handle coverage. Now let's talk about how well the Oregon Ducks are going to handle coverage. Kirby Smart obviously has had a big influence on Dan Lanning. Lanning came from Georgia to Oregon a couple seasons back. And being a Kirby Smart guy, obviously, that can be a very good thing. Kirby Smart has had a very successful run as the head coach of the Georgia Bulldogs and was a pretty darn good defensive coordinator under Nick Saban at Alabama before that. But there are also ways where Kirby Smart's defenses you can get got there, and in some of those cases as well. What's something that Ohio State fans can maybe look out for on Saturday night in that kind of area?
Yeah, and you'll get a lot, as I said, not identical to Georgia certainly, or what Nick Saban has done in the past, but a lot of the same influence. That comes in a couple ways. They run a ton of coverages in the back end. So the good news with that, obviously, is you give yourself a lot of options, right? The downside to that is you become a jack of all trades, master of none. And especially like when teams like Michigan State will do in this clip we're going to show, like uses motion, you'll see a lot of checking in the secondary. They have to adjust a lot to motion. That opens up some opportunities downfield. Like I thought Michigan State had open receivers and just wasn't able either to protect up front and or just Aiden Childs was not seeing it. The other thing that they do is, again, we've talked about Ohio State playing a 4-3 against 12 personnel, right? Oregon likes to go to this 3-4 odd front against 12 personnel, which is a long time Kirby Smart and before that Nick Saban staple. And so you get a legit zero technique nose guard right over the center. You get 2 4 eyes, so they're sort of inside the outside shoulder of each guard, 2 outside linebackers. So what Michigan State did, like on this clip, is they went to a lot of 12. Obviously, they played a lot of 12 against Ohio State, so it fits what they would do. But to throw the football, right? And we've seen Ohio State do that some as well. So like Emeka Buka's third touchdown catch against Iowa, that was like a tight bunch, 12 personnel. So they got Iowa with 3 linebackers on the field and then got Emeka Buka singled up on a wheel route on a linebacker. So I think you'll see quite a bit of using 12 personnel and motion to mess with the checks and the coverage. I think, in terms of Chip Kelly handling the odd front, I think you're going to see, those leave. You can see out here like the bubble between the 4-eye and the outside linebacker. So I think you'll see, leaning into Will Howard on zone read run concepts where you're reading the 4-eye like a midline, you're kicking out the defensive end effectively, and you create a hole off the read. That Chip Kelly, full play where you pull the center Seth McLaughlin against the odd front, you get outside the 3 defensive linemen. Now, I will say when you go 11 personnel, they tend to, like Kirby Smart, go to more of a 4-2-5 look, and then they'll be off, shaded on single gaps like Ohio State does. So I think you'll see, Ohio State play with motion, play with shifts, these bunch sets, 12 personnel, trying to get Oregon into disadvantageous matchups. And the last thing I'll add is, even though as I said, I felt like Michigan State and UCLA before that had opportunities downfield against, again, trying to pass off receivers and the like and on cover 4 that Oregon, I don't think was super successful doing. They just weren't, the opponent wasn't successful, diagnosing and picking it apart. Statistically, like Oregon hasn't been great against the run either. So I think that, obviously Chip Kelly is going to want to make sure to establish the run. This is going to be probably the first game where you get a full dose of Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. I mean, I would look for, Judkins to be more in the 18 to 20 carry range this game. And I think you'll see them try to, open up opportunities through formations, as I said, get the ball out, and then turn back to the running game inside.
All right. Well, that sounds like a formula for potentially a winning game for Ohio State. The Buckeyes heading into the game as about a field goal favorite. Should be a fantastic game. We were just over at campus at Autzen Stadium. Got a chance to kind of take a peek inside. It is just an incredible venue, very picturesque, very unique venue. Very much looking forward to seeing a game there on Saturday night. Guessing you guys are as well. Buckeyes and Ducks kicking off at 7:30 Saturday night. We will have full pre- and post-game coverage, as always, at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle and BuckeyeHuddle.com. Should be a ton to talk about on that post-game show. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Make sure you're subscribed as well at BuckeyeHuddle.com, because we've had a ton of content there this week as well. That's where Tony, Kevin, and I cover the team. Mark covers recruiting. Got our whole team of X's and O's gurus, not just Ross. We got a whole group of guys there to make you a smarter football fan. That is all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.